Hello, my name is Kelly Lynn Beck. I'm a court-appointed attorney representing children, youth, and parents in Dependency Court. And for the past 10 years, have been a senior permanency trainer at the National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness at Seneca Family of Agencies. Previously, I worked with California Judicial Council and also the National Council for Juvenile and Family Court Judges. I've been involved in dependency, representation, and training for the past 20 plus years. I'm here today with Clif Venable, who is an internet search specialist here at NIPFC. Clif, how long have you been doing this work?
Hi, Kelly. I've been doing this for about 15 years. I started initially with Kevin Campbell when he was developing the family finding model and first using internet resources to try to locate extended family for kids in care. And I would do searches for him initially. It became a passion of mine, and ultimately I moved over to Seneca Seneca Family of Agencies, NIPFC, to do it full time. And in the last 10 years, I've probably done tens of thousands of these types of searches on behalf of youth in care.
Great. So Clif, as you know, I conduct trainings, workshops, strategic planning sessions all over the country. I know you run internet searches for child welfare and others. You run searches for me in my court-appointed work, but also during my trainings. Part of my training curriculum includes a clear understanding of some federal and state mandates, and those include reasonable efforts and also the agency's requirement to utilize due diligence in identifying, locating, and noticing relatives. These mandates, to me, are extremely proactive. It's not a wait and see who's going to show up. It's rather what relatives can we uncover? What relatives can we invite to participate? However, I still hear out in the field and also in court from others that there are no relatives identified. So one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, Clif, is to kind of unpack what a thorough internet search looks like and how we can ensure that those internet searches are done correctly and thereby helping us meet those mandates that I just described. So how about it? You have time today?
Yeah, it sounds good, Kelly. Before we get into this, I do the diligent sort of internet side of it, and I also hear the term reasonable efforts a lot. And I've always been sort of curious how those, in your mind, how do those two terms relate?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a question that I hear quite often. There's really no definition of reasonable efforts, and the best way to describe what that is maybe by describing when it's required. So it's actually a finding that's required by the court, and it's required when the youth first comes into care. The agency has to utilize reasonable efforts in order to prevent removal, reasonable efforts to return the child home, or if the child isn't able to go home, reasonable efforts to finalize a permanent plan for the child. Reasonable efforts isn't just services. It includes a type of brainstorming or thinking outside the box for the agency to identify maybe a non-custodial parent, identifying other relatives that can participate or can be a support for that youth. So reasonable efforts is kind of the big picture. That's what's required. I think it's the most critical of findings that the court can make. But under that umbrella of reasonable efforts is our requirements under fostering connections. And that requires a due diligence search to uncover those relatives. So the due diligent part of locating and noticing relatives and involving them in the child welfare process is kind of a piece of reasonable efforts, or in my mind, a piece of reasonable efforts. So does that help?
Yeah, it does. It helps me see how what I do fits into the larger picture, yes.
Great. It's not an easy question to answer, but it certainly is an important one. So thank you for bringing that up. So I'm just curious, when a judicial officer is in court and they hear from the agency that there's no relatives identified, nobody's to support the child, nobody to participate, nobody that can maybe take placement of the child. When they hear that, do you think that's truly the case, that there's just no relatives at all to be uncovered?
From my experience doing this for, again, the last 15 years, it's pretty rare that you would not find any relatives on either side. There are some cases if both, say, both parents are recent immigrants, maybe most of their relatives are living outside the states. If both parents are underage parents, they're often hard to find through using internet resources. And then we run across cases where both of the parents were themselves in foster care, in which it might be difficult to find relatives for them because they didn't have relative connections growing up. But even then, you could probably find their information somewhere in the system where there's probably information on relatives. So say it's fairly rare that you wouldn't be able to find relatives on either side.
I thought so. You've run so many searches for me, and you've uncovered at a minimum 5 to 15 relatives, let alone 50 to 150. And that's typically what I see when you run searches for me. So in addition to those sort of challenges you just identified, in your experience, what's the most common reasons why a judge would hear that there's no relatives uncovered? If somebody indicates, if the agency or social worker says, we did an internet search and we just haven't found anyone.
I would say if they don't fit into those categories that I mentioned before, recent immigrants, underage parents, then it's probably using incomplete resources, incomplete internet resources, because obviously there's multiple places you can go to find information on the internet. And the other big factor is probably training. I find a lot of times in these cases that the search process is just given to a individual worker to go and try to find relatives, and they may have very limited training and not a lot of experience doing it. So I think those are probably the two main factors that probably are limiting counties from finding relatives.
So how would that judicial officer, say a judge is on the bench and hears that there's no relatives identified, or sees a report that includes no relatives uncovered and no supports for that youth, how can that judge be sure that the internet search was done thoroughly and thoughtfully?
Well, I think you could ask a certain qualifying questions, and it might be maybe have a checklist of things that you want to make sure that the county is doing. Similar to the checklist for the search for looking for absent parents, there's a pretty extensive checklist for that. So I would say you would want to make sure they're using one of the better professional databases like Clear or Accurate or Seneca, that they're using more than one database, because often a person might be in one database and not in another. So you want to make sure you're doing that. Using social media is very important these days. It's like standard practice in family finding for helping to locate relatives. I would say even within the report, checking the associates. A lot of agencies will overlook associates on the report and think they're just friends or someone that knows the parent, when they're very often, particularly in child welfare cases, they're blood relatives or fictive kin. I would say also make sure you're searching for dad. I know, Kelly, that's a passion of yours, to make sure we're not leaving dad's side out, because as you say, leaving dad's side out is leaving out 50% of the relatives. So make sure that you're searching for dad, looking for information to conduct a search on him, and making sure that's being done. And then again, I think workers having a minimal amount of training on using these databases, not only the professional databases, but social network sites and obituary sites, those kind of resources. I would also say go back and check the case files. You know, part of case mining is part of the diligent search effort. So if you're not finding anything through internet resources, go back to the case files. Maybe you'll find a different spelling, more information, the name of another relative. And then I would say you could also give the report to the judge and let them look at it. The judge could ask for a copy of the report, because we often find that they say there's no one on the report when there really are people there that either they tried to contact but were not, you know, maybe sent one letter and then no one responded, or they've disqualified this relative for some reason that doesn't hold up. So I would say having that type of a checklist you could go through would assure that the county is doing more of a thorough internet search.
Great. So I know that you have, you work with child welfare agencies and you work with states and counties and other organizations. If a judicial officer or an attorney wanted to run a search, an internet search through you, how would they do that?
Well, they could set up an account with us. It's fairly simple, and then they just would contact me by email, and then I would get them information on setting up an account. Attorneys certainly can do it. Kelly, you do these searches all the time in your dependency work. We have a couple of accounts with courts, so courts certainly could set up an account to run searches in a way to sort of as a check against what the county is finding to make sure that nothing's been missed.
Great. And then if they run a search, if somebody runs a search through you, how quickly do they get the results back?
You generally would get it back within 24 hours. And I know, Kelly, you use this for your practice, and generally we're able to get it back to you in time to use the information. And also, a typical report's going to give you relative information on potential relatives for the parent, contact information, addresses, emails, potentially phone numbers. It's also going to have associates on there, which again could be fictive kin or sometimes blood relatives. We also have in our reports a color chart that's sort of an easy reference guide of what's in the report, because often you get these multiple pages. It's easy to see it all in one place, the relatives that are found. And then we also do an Excel version of it too, which helps with mail merge. We just heard from many customers that that part of the sending out notification letters is very time intensive. So that's typically what you're going to get in a report. Whether you're using a better database or not, we have a couple extra features with ours, but that's generally what you would get in a database report.
And how much would a search cost?
Our searches are generally anywhere from $20 to $30 per parent, depending on whether you pay up front or you pay as you go. So really the max you would ever spend on a kid would probably be $60, because doing both parents typically covers that. That's the max price, $40 per kid if you're doing an annual rate. So it's a fairly nominal fee considering what's involved.
Great. And then you suggested people just email you. What's your email address?
Sure. My email address is Clif with one F _ Venable at senecacenter.org. And you can also contact us and see the search side of the business on familypermanency.org. And we also have training in all areas of family finding on that website.
That's right. And there's training for internet searching that you provide, and there's other permanency related trainings that we provide on family finding, concurrent planning, several other items. Again, that's familypermanency.org if you're interested. But Clif, thank you so much for your time. I know you're really busy and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kelly. It's been great. Appreciate it.